The War of the Worlds. Are you a burp girl? No. Chapter 6. The Work of 15 Days. Hello, cult leader. Do you have a favorite book? No, not really. I like a lot of books. Normally I would like refresh us on where we were, but I don't remember even. I do remember that. For some time I stood tottering on the mound, regardless of my safety. Within that noisome den from which I had emerged, I had thought with a narrow intensity only of our immediate security. I had not realized what had been happening to the world, had not anticipated this startling vision of unfamiliar things. I had expected to see Sheen in ruins. I found about me the landscape, weird and lurid, of another planet. For that moment, I touched an emotion beyond the common range of men, yet one that the poor brutes we dominate know only too well. I felt as a rabbit might feel, returning to his burrow, and suddenly confronted by the work of a dozen busy navvies digging the foundations of a house. I felt the first inkling of a thing that presently grew quite clear in my mind, that oppressed me for many days. A sense of dethronement, a persuasion that I was no longer a master, but an animal among the other animals, under the Martian heel. With us it would be as with them, to lurk and watch, to run and hide. The fear and empire of man had passed away. But so soon as this strangeness had been realized, it passed, and my dominant motive became the hunger of my long and dismal fast. In the direction away from the pit, I saw, beyond a red-covered wall, a patch of garden ground unburied. This gave me a hint, and I went knee-deep, and sometimes neck-deep, in the red weed. The density of the weed gave me a reassuring sense of hiding. The wall was some 6 feet high, and when I attempted to clamber it, I found I could not lift my feet to the crest. So I went along by the side of it, and came to a corner and a rockwork that enabled me to get to the top and tumble into the garden I coveted. Here I found some young onions, a couple of gladiolus bulbs, and a quantity of immature carrots, all of which I secured, and scrambled over a ruined wall, when on my way through scarlet and crimson trees towards Q. It was like walking through an avenue of gigantic blood drops. I was possessed with 2 ideas: to get more food, and to limp, as soon and as far as my strength permitted, out of this accursed, unearthly region of the pit. Some way farther, in a grassy place, was a group of mushrooms, which I also devoured. And then I came upon a brown sheet of flowing shallow water, where meadows used to be. These fragments of nourishment served only to whet my hunger. At first I was surprised at this flood in a hot, dry summer. But afterwards, I discovered that it was caused by the tropical exuberance of the red weed. Directly this extraordinary growth encountered water, it straightway became gigantic and of unparalleled fecundity. Its seeds were simply poured down into the water of the Wey and the Thames, and its swiftly growing and titanic water fronds speedily choked both of these rivers. At Putney, as I afterwards saw, the bridge was almost lost in a tangle of this weed, and at Richmond, too. The Thames water poured in a broad, shallow stream across the meadows of Hampton and Twickenham. As the waters spread, the weed followed them, until the ruined villas of the Thames Valley were for a time lost in this red swamp, whose margin I explored, and much of the desolation the Martians had caused was concealed. In the end, the red weed succumbed almost as quickly as it had spread. A cankering disease, due, it is believed, to the action of certain bacteria, presently seized upon it. Now, by the action of natural selection, all terrestrial plants have acquired a resisting power against bacterial diseases. They never succumb without a severe struggle. But the red weed rotted like a thing already dead. The fronds became bleached and then shriveled and brittle. They broke off at the least touch, and the waters that stimulated their early growth carried their last vestiges out to sea. My first act on coming to this water was, of course, to slake my thirst. I drank a great deal of it, and moving by impulse, gnawed some fronds of red weed. But they were watery, and had a sickly metallic taste. I found the water was sufficiently shallow for me to wade securely, although the red weed impeded my feet a little. But the flood evidently got deeper towards the river, and I turned back to Mortlake. I managed to make out the road by means of occasional ruins of its villas and fences and lamps, and so presently I got out of this spate and made my way to the hill going up towards Rosamton, and came out on Putney Common. Here the scenery changed from the strange and unfamiliar to the wreckage of the familiar. Patches of ground exhibited the devastation of a cyclone, and in a few score yards I would come upon perfectly undisturbed spaces, houses with their blinds trimly drawn and doors closed, as if they had been left by a day for the owners, as if... Oh, my funny bone! That was terrible. My, hand is numb. What the fuck? This is fine. And in a few score yards, I would come upon perfectly undisturbed spaces. Houses with their blinds trimly drawn and doors closed, as if they had been left for a day by the owners, or as if their inhabitants slept within. The red weed was less abundant. The tall trees along the lane were free from the red creeper. I hunted for food among the trees, finding nothing, and I also raided a couple of silent houses, but they had already been broken into and ransacked. I rested for the remainder of the daylight in a shrubbery, being, in my enfeebled condition, too fatigued to push on. All this time I saw no human beings, and no sign of the Martians. I encountered a couple of hungry-looking dogs, but both hurried circuitously away from the advances I made them. Near Roehampton, I had seen 2 human skeletons. Not bodies, but skeletons, picked clean. And in the wood by me I found the crushed and scattered bones of several cats and rabbits, and the skull of a sheep. But though I gnawed parts of these in my mouth, there was nothing to be got from them. After sunset, I struggled along the road towards Putney, where I think the heat ray must have been used for some reason. And in a garden beyond Roehampton, I got a quantity of immature potatoes, sufficient to stay my hunger. From this garden one looked down upon Putney and the river. The aspect of the place in the dusk was singularly desolate. Blackened trees, blackened, desolate ruins. And down the hill, the sheets of the flooded river, red tinged with the weed. And over all, silence. It filled me with indescribable terror to think how swiftly that desolating change had come. For a time I believed that mankind had been swept out of existence, and that I stood there alone, the last man left alive. Hard by the top of Putney Hill, I came upon another skeleton, with the arms dislocated and removed several yards from the rest of the body. As I proceeded, I became more and more convinced that the extermination of mankind was, save for some stragglers like myself, already accomplished in this part of the world. The Martians, I thought, had gone on and left the country desolated, seeking food elsewhere. Perhaps even now they were destroying Berlin or Paris. Or it might be they had gone northward. End of chapter 6. Have a good day at work. Hello, Norm. No, Moose. My arm. What are you? What are you? I mean, still, like 4 hours. Chapter 7. The Man on Putney Hill. I spent that night in the inn that stands at the top of Putney Hill, sleeping in a bed for the first time since my flight to Leatherhead. I will not tell the needless trouble I had breaking into that house. Afterwards, I found the front door was on the latch, nor how I ransacked every room for food, until, just on the verge of despair, in what seemed to me to be a servant's bedroom, I found a rat-gnawed crust and 2 tins of pineapple. The place had already been searched and emptied. In the bar, I afterwards found some biscuits and sandwiches that had been overlooked. The latter I could not eat, they were too rotten, but the former not only stayed my hunger, but filled my pockets. I lit no lamps, fearing some Martian might come beating that part of London for food in the night. Before I went to bed, I had an interval of restlessness, and prowled from window to window, peering out for some sign of these monsters. I slept little. As I lay in bed, I found myself thinking consecutively, a thing I do not remember to have done since my last argument with the curate. During all the intervening time, my mental condition had been a hurrying succession of vague emotional states, or some sort of stupid receptivity. But in the night, my brain, reinforced, I suppose, by the food I had eaten, grew clear again, and I thought. Three things struggled for possession of my mind: the killing of the curate, the whereabouts of the Martians, and the possible fate of my wife. The former gave me no sensation of horror or remorse to recall. I saw it simply as a thing done, a memory infinitely disagreeable, but quite without the quality of remorse. I saw myself then as I see myself now, driven step by step towards that hasty blow, the creature of a sequence of accidents leading inevitably to that. I felt no condemnation. Yet the memory, static, unprogressive, haunted me. In the silence of the night, with that sense of nearness of God that sometimes comes to the stillness and the darkness, I stood my trial, my only trial, for that moment of wrath and fear. I retraced every step of our conversation, from the moment when I found him crouching beside me, heedless of my thirst, and pointing to the fire and smoke that streamed up from the ruins of Weybridge. We had been incapable of cooperation. Grim chance had taken no heed of that. Had I foreseen, I should have left him at Halliford. But I did not foresee. And crime is to foresee and do. And I set this down as I have set all this story down, as it was. There were no witnesses. All these things I might have concealed. But I set it down, and the reader must form his judgment, as he will. And when, by an effort, I had set aside that picture of a prostrate body, I faced the problem of the Martians and the fate of my wife. For the former, I had no data. I could imagine 100 things, and so, unhappily, I could for the latter. And suddenly that night became terrible. I found myself sitting up in bed, staring at the dark. I found myself praying that the heat ray might have suddenly and painlessly struck her out of being. Since the night of my return from Leatherhead, I had not prayed. I had uttered prayers, fetish prayers, had prayed as heathens mutter charms when I was in extremity. But now I prayed indeed, pleading steadfastly and sanely, face to face with the darkness of God. Strange night, strangest in this, and so soon as the dawn had come, I, who talked with God, crept out of the house like a rat leaving its hiding place. A creature scarcely larger, an inferior animal, a thing that for any passing whim of our masters might be hunted and killed. Perhaps they also prayed confidently to God. Surely, if we have learned nothing else, this war has taught us pity. Pity for those witless souls that suffer our dominion. The morning was bright and fine, and the eastern sky glowed pink, and was fretted with little golden clouds. In the road that runs from the top of Putney Hill to Wimbledon was a number of poor vestiges of the panic torrent that must have poured Londonward on Sunday night after the fighting began. There was a little two-wheeled car, inscribed with the name of Thomas Loeb, greengrocer, New Malden, with a smashed wheel and an abandoned tin trunk. There was a straw hat trampled in the now hardened mud. And at the top of West Hill, a lot of blood-stained glass about the overturned water trough. I had an idea of going to Leatherhead, though I knew that there I had the poorest chance of finding my wife. Certainly, unless death had overtaken them suddenly, my cousins and she would have fled thence. But it seemed to me I might find or learn there whither the Surrey people had fled. I knew I wanted to find my wife, that my heart ached for her and the world of men, but I had no clear idea how the finding might be done. I was also sharply aware, now, of my intense loneliness. From the corner I went, under cover of a thicket of trees and benches, to the edge of Wimbledon Common, stretching wide and far. That dark expanse was lit in patches by yellow gorse and broom. There was no red weed to be seen, and as I prowled, hesitating, on the verge of the open, the sun rose, flooding it all with light and vitality. I came upon a busy swarm of little frogs in a swampy place among the trees. I stopped to look at them, drawing a lesson from their stout resolve to live. And presently, turning suddenly, with an odd feeling of being watched, I beheld something crouching amid a clump of bushes. I stood regarding this. I made a step towards it, and it rose up and became a man with a cutlass. I approached him slowly. He stood silent and motionless, regarding me. As I drew nearer, I perceived he was dressed in clothes as dusty and filthy as my own. He looked, indeed, as though he had been dragged through a culvert. Nearer, I distinguished the green slime of ditches, mixing with the pale drab of dried clay, and shiny, coaly patches. His black hair fell over his eyes, and his face was dark and dirty and sunken, so that at first I did not recognize him. "Stop," he cried, when I was within 10 yards of him, and I stopped. His voice was hoarse. "Where do you come from?" he said. I thought, surveying him. "I come from Mortlake," I said. "I was buried near the pit the Martians made about their cylinder. I have worked my way out and escaped. There's no food about here," he said. "This is my country. All this hill down to the river and back to Clapham, and all the way up to the edge of the common. There's only food for one. Which way are you going?" I answered slowly. "I don't know," I said. "I have been buried in the ruins of a house 13 or 14 days. I don't know what has happened." He looked at me doubtfully, then started and looked with a changed expression. "I've no wish to stop about here," said I. "I think I shall go to Leatherhead, for my wife was there." He shot out a pointing finger. "It's you," he said. "The man from Woking. And you weren't killed at Weybridge?" I recognized him at the same moment. "You're the artillery man who came into my garden." "Good luck," he said. "We are lucky ones. Fancy you." He put out a hand and I took it. "I crawled up a drain," he said. "But they didn't kill everyone. And after they went away, I got off towards Walton across the fields, but it's not 16 days altogether, and your hair is gray." He looked over his shoulder suddenly. "Only a rook," he said. "One gets to know that birds have shadows these days. This is a big open. Let us crawl under those bushes and talk." "Have you seen any Martians?" I said. "Since I crawled out." "They've gone away across London," he said. "I guess they've got a bigger camp there. Of a night, all over there, Hampstead way, the sky is alive with their lights. It's like a great city, and in the glare you can just see them moving. By daylight you can't. But nearer, I haven't seen them." He counted on his fingers. 5 days. Then I saw a couple across Hammersmith way, carrying something big. And the night before last." He stopped and spoke impressively. "It was just a matter of light, but it was something up in the air. I believe they've built a flying machine and are learning to fly." I stopped, on hands and knees, for we had come to the bushes. "Fly?" "Yes," he said, "fly." I went on a little bower and sat down. I went on into a little bower and sat down. It is all over with humanity," I said. "If they can do that, they will simply go around the world." He nodded. "They will. But it will relieve things over here a bit. And besides," he looked at me, "aren't you satisfied it is up with humanity?" "I am. We're down." We're beat. I stared. Strange as it may seem, I had not arrived at this fact. A fact perfectly obvious, so soon as he spoke. I had still held a vague hope. Rather, I had kept a lifelong habit of mind. He repeated his words. We're beat. They carried absolute conviction. It's all over, he said. They've lost one. Just one. And they've made their looting good and crippled the greatest power in the world. They've walked all over us. The death of that one at Weybridge was an accident. And these are only pioneers. They kept on coming. These green stars, I've seen none these 5 or 6 days. But I've no doubt they're falling somewhere every night. Nothing's to be done. We're under. We're beat. I made him no answer. I sat staring before me, trying in vain to devise some countervailing thought. This isn't a war, said the artilleryman. It never was a war, any more than there's a war between men and ants. Suddenly I recalled the night in the observatory. After the 10th shot, they fired no more, at least until the first cylinder came. How do you know? Said the artilleryman. I explained. He thought. Something wrong with the gun, he said. But what if there is? They'll get it right again. And even if there's a delay, how can it alter the end? It's just men and ants. There's the ants, build their cities, live their lives, have wars, revolutions, until the men want them out of their way. And then they go out of the way. That's what we are now. Just ants. Only, yes, I said, we're eatable ants. We sat looking at each other. And what will they do with us? I said. That's what I've been thinking, he said. That's what I've been thinking. After Weybridge, I went south, thinking. I saw what was up. Most of the people were hard at it, squealing and exciting themselves. But I'm not so fond of squealing. I've been in the sight of death once or twice. I'm not an ornamental soldier. And at the best and worst, death, it's just death. And it's the man that keeps on thinking comes through. I saw everyone tracking away south. Says I, food won't last this way, and I turned right back. I went for the Martians, like a sparrow goes for man. All around, he waved a hand to the horizon. They're starving in heaps, bolting, treading on each other. He saw my face and halted awkwardly. No doubt lots who had money have gone away to France, he said. He seemed to hesitate whether to apologize. Met my eyes and went on. There's food all about here. Canned things in shops, wines, spirits, mineral waters, and the water mains and drains are empty. Well, I was telling you what I was thinking. Here's intelligent things, I said, and it seems they want us for food. First, they'll smash us up. Ships, machines, guns, cities, all the order and organization. All that will go. But if we were the size of ants, we might pull through. But we're not. It's all too bulky to stop. That's the first certainty, eh? I assented. It is, I've thought it out. Very well then, next, at present, we're caught as we're wanted. A Martian has only to go a few miles to get a crowd on the run. And I saw one day, out by Wandsworth, picking houses to pieces and rooting among the wreckage. But they won't keep on doing that. So soon as they've settled all our guns and ships and smashed our railways and done all the things they're doing over there, they will begin catching us systematic, picking the best and storing us in cages and things. That's what they will start doing in a bit. Lord, they haven't begun on us yet. Don't you see that? Not begun, I exclaimed. Not begun. All that's happened so far is through our not having the sense to keep quiet. Worrying them with guns and such foolery, and losing our heads, and rushing off in crowds, to where there wasn't any more safety than where we were. They don't want to bother us yet. They're making their things. Making all the things they couldn't bring with them. Getting things ready for the rest of their people. Very likely, that's why the cylinders have stopped for a bit. For fear of hitting those who are here. And instead of our rushing about blind on the howl, or getting dynamite on the chance of busting them up, we've got to fix ourselves up according to a new state of affairs. That's how I figure it out. It isn't quite according to what a man wants for his species, but it's about what the facts point to. And that's the principle I acted on. Cities, nations, civilization, progress, it's all over. That game's up. We're beat. But if that is so, what is there to live for? The artilleryman looked at me for a moment. There won't be any more blessed concerts for 1,000,000 years or so. There won't be any Royal Academy of Arts, and no nice little feeds at restaurants. If it's amusement you're after, I reckon the game is up.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Kitty scared you?
Yeah. Can I get the pen really quick?
Yeah.
Thanks. Hey, chat, how's the book?
I think they're enjoying it.
I would assume so. Thanks.
Book is great. Almost done, though.
Good. Wait, you said you're almost done?
Yeah, we're almost done with it. Well, like a few more chapters.
Okay, cool.
I mean, that was chat telling you.
Does anybody read along with, like, a copy?
Not that I know of. Somebody might, though. Anyone reading along at home? Oh, God. Nah. If it's amusement you're after, I reckon the game is up. If you've got any drawing room manners, or a dislike to eating peas with a knife, or dropping H's, you better chuck 'em away. They ain't no further use. You mean? I mean that men like me are gonna go on living. For the sake of the breed. I tell you, I'm grim set on living. And if I'm not mistaken, you'll show what insides you've got, too, before long. We aren't going to be exterminated. And I don't mean to be caught, either. And tamed and fattened and bred like a thundering ox. Ugh. Fancy those brown creepers. You don't mean to say. I do. I'm going on, under their feet. I've planned it. I've thought it out. We men are beat. We don't know enough. We've got to learn before we have. We've got to learn before we've got a chance. And we've got to live and keep independent while we learn. See? That's what has to be done. I stared astonished and stirred profoundly by the man's resolution. Great God, cried I. But you are a man indeed. And suddenly I gripped his hand. Eh? He said, with his eyes shining. I've thought it out, eh? Go on, I said. Well, those who mean to escape their catching must get ready. I'm getting ready. Mind you, it isn't all of us that are made for wild beasts. And that's what it's got to be. That's why I watched you. I had my doubts. You're slender. I didn't know that it was you, you see, or just how you'd been buried. All these, the sort of people that used to live in these houses, and all those damn little clerks that used to live down the way, they'd be no good. They haven't any spirit in them. No proud dreams, and no proud lusts. And a man who hasn't one or the other, Lord, what is he but funk and precautions? They just used to skedaddle off to work, and I've seen hundreds of 'em, bit of breakfast in hand, running wild and shining to catch each other. And shining to catch their season ticket train, for fear they'd be dismissed if they didn't. Working at businesses they were afraid to take for the trouble to understand. Skedaddling back for fear that they wouldn't be in time for dinner. Keeping indoors after dinner for fear of the back streets. And sleeping with the wives they married, not because they wanted them, but because they had a bit of money that would make for safety in their one little miserable skedaddle through the world. Lives insured, and a bit invested for fear of accidents. And so Sundays, fear of the hereafter. As if hell was built for rabbits. Well, the Martians will just be a godsend to these. Nice roomy cages, fattening food, careful breeding. No worry. After a week or so chasing about the fields and lands on empty stomachs, they'll come and be caught cheerful. They'll be quite glad after a bit. They'll wonder what people did before there were Martians to take care of them. And the bar loafers, and mashers, and singers. I can imagine them, he said, with a sort of somber gratification. There'll be any amount of sentiment and religion loose among them. There's hundreds of things I saw with my eyes that I've only begun to see clearly these last few days. There's lots will take things as they are, fat and stupid, and lots will be worried by a sort of feeling that it's all wrong, that they ought to be doing something. Now, whenever things are so that a lot of people feel they ought to be doing something, the weak, and those who go weak with a lot of complicated thinking, always make for a sort of do-nothing religion, very pious and superior, and submit to persecution and the will of the Lord. Very likely you've seen the same thing. It's energy in a gale of funk, and turned clean inside out. These cages will be so full of psalms and hymns and piety, and those of a less simple sort will work in a bit of, what is it, eroticism? He paused. Very likely these Martians will make pets of some of them, train them to do tricks, who knows, get sentimental over the pet boy who grew up and had to be killed. And some, maybe, they will train to hunt us. No, I cried. That's impossible. No human being. What's the good of going on with such lies? Said the artilleryman. There's men who'd do it cheerful. What nonsense to pretend there isn't. And I succumbed to his conviction. If they come after me, he said. Lord, if they come after me. And subsided into grim meditation. I sat contemplating these things. I could find nothing to bring against this man's reasoning. In the days before the invasion, no one would have questioned my intellectual superiority to his. I, a professed and recognized writer on philosophical themes, and he, a common soldier. And yet, he had already formulated a situation that I had scarcely realized. What are you doing? I said presently. What plans have you made? He hesitated. Well, it's like this, he said. What have we to do? We have to invent a sort of life where men can live and breed and be sufficiently secure to bring the children up. Yes. Wait a bit, and I'll make it clearer than I thought it ought to be done. And I'll make it clearer what I think ought to be done. The tame ones will go, like all tame beasts. In a few generations, they'll be big, beautiful, rich-blooded, stupid rubbish. The risk is that we who keep wild will go savage, degenerate into a sort of big, savage rat. You see, how I mean to live is underground. I've been thinking about the drains. Of course, those who don't know drains think horrible things. But under this London are miles and miles, hundreds of miles. And a few days' rain, and London empty, will leave them sweet and clean. The main drains are big enough and airy enough for anyone. Then there's cellars, vaults, stores, from which bolting passages may be made to the drains. And the railway tunnels and subways. Eh? You begin to see? And we form a band. Able-bodied, clean-minded men. We're not going to pick up any rubbish that drifts in. Weaklings go out again. As you meant me to go? Well, I parlayed, didn't I? We won't quarrel about that. Go on. Those who stop obey orders. Able-bodied, clean-minded women we want also. Mothers and teachers. No lackadaisical ladies. No blasted rolling eyes. We can't have anyone weak or silly. Life is real again. And the useless and cumbersome and mischievous have to die. They ought to die. They ought to be willing to die. It's a sort of disloyalty, after all, to live and taint the race. And they can't be happy. Moreover, dying's none so dreadful. It's the funking makes it bad. And in all those places we will gather. Our district will be London, and we may even be able to keep a watch and run about in the open when the Martians keep away. Play cricket, perhaps. That's how we shall save the race. Eh? It's a possible thing. But saving the race is nothing in itself. As I say, that's only being rats. It's saving our knowledge and adding to it is the thing. There, men like you come in. There's books. There's models. We must make great, safe places down deep and get all the books we can. Not novels and poetry swipes, but ideas, science books. That's where men like you come in. We must go to the British Museum and pick all those books through. Especially we must keep up our science. Learn more. We must watch these Martians. Some of us must go as spies. When it's all working, perhaps I will. Get caught, I mean. And the great thing is, we must leave the Martians alone. We mustn't even steal. If we get in their way, we clear out. We must show them that we mean no harm. Yes, I know, but they're intelligent things, and they won't hunt us down if they have all they want, and think we're just harmless vermin. The artilleryman paused and laid a brown hand upon my arm. After all, it may not be so much we may have to learn. Before, just imagine this. 4 or 5 of their fighting machines, suddenly starting off, heat rays right and left. And not a Martian in 'em. But men. Sorry. And not a Martian in 'em. Not a Martian in 'em, but men. Men who have learned the way how. It may be in my time. Those men. Fancy having one of them lovely things, with its heat ray wide and free. Fancy having it in control. What would it matter if you smashed to smithereens at the end of the run, after a bust like that? I reckon the Martians will open their beautiful eyes. Can't you see them, man? Can't you see them hurrying, puffing and blowing and hooting their other mechanical affairs? Something out of gear in every case. And swish, bang, rattle, swish. Just as they are fumbling over it, swish comes the heat ray. And behold, man has come back to his own. For a while, the imaginative daring of the artilleryman, and the tone of assurance and courage he assumed, completely dominated my mind. I believed unhesitatingly, both in his forecast of human destiny and in the practicability of his astonishing scheme. And the reader who thinks me susceptible and foolish must contrast his position, reading steadily with all his thoughts about the subject, and mine, crouching fearfully in the bushes and listening, distracted by apprehension. We talked in this manner through the early morning time, and later crept out of the bushes, and after scanning the sky for Martians, hurried precipitately to the house on Putney Hill where he had made his lair. It was the coal cellar of the place, and when I saw the work he had spent a week upon, it was a burrow scarcely 10 yards long, which he designed to reach the main drain on Putney Hill. I had my first inkling of the gulf between his dreams and his powers. Such a hole I could have dug in a day. But I believed in him sufficiently to work with him all that morning, until past midday at his digging. We had a garden barrow, and shot the earth we were moved against. We had a garden barrow, and shot the earth we removed against the kitchen range. We refreshed ourselves with a tin of mock turtle soup and wine from the neighboring pantry. I found a curious relief from the aching strangeness of the world in this steady labor. As we worked, I turned his project over in my mind, and presently objections and doubts began to rise. I worked there all the morning. So glad I was to find myself with a purpose again. After working an hour, I began to speculate on the distance one had to go before the cloaca was reached, the chances we had of missing it altogether. My immediate trouble was why we should dig this long tunnel, when it was possible to get into the drain at once down one of the manholes and work back to the house. It seemed to me, too, that the house was inconveniently chosen and required a needless length of tunnel. And just as I was beginning to face these things, the artilleryman stopped digging and looked at me. "We're working well," he said. He put down his spade. "Let us knock off a bit," he said. "I think it's time we..." Reconnoitered?
Reconnoiter.
Reconnoitered. Make military observation of a region. I think it's time we reconnoitered from the roof of the house. I was for going on, and after a little hesitation he resumed his spade. And then suddenly I was struck by a thought. I stopped, and so did he at once. Kitty, you can do it. You can do it. Push. Come on. You can. Okay. Hi, guys. And then suddenly I was struck by a thought. I stopped, and so did he at once. "Why were you walking about the common," I said, "instead of being here?" "Taking the air," he said. "I was coming back. It's safer by night." "But the work." "Oh, one can't always work," he said. And in a flash I saw the man plain. He hesitated, holding his spade. "We ought to reconnoiter now," he said. "'Cause if any come near, they may hear the spades and drop on us unaware." I was no longer disposed to object. We went together to the roof and stood on a ladder peeping out of the roof door. No Martians were to be seen. Want some help, kitty? Come here. Come here. Come here. I said come here. Don't leave. I know what you want. Come on. Honestly, same digital pressure. Maybe because of the weed that I smoked, but away. No, they don't like that hole better. It's just a step. But my voice is like hoarse today. So I'm sorry. Cooking cookies is a good reason. I know it is, Artica. Hide your jealousy, gosh. Okay, blah blah blah. No Martians were to be seen. And we ventured out on the tiles and slipped down under shelter of the parapet. From this position, a shrubbery hid the greater portion of Putney, but we could see the river below, a bubbly mass of red weed, and the lower parts of Lambeth flooded in red. The red creepers swarmed up the trees about the old palace, and their branches stretched, gaunt and dead, and set with shriveled leaves from amid its clusters. It was strange how entirely dependent both these things were upon flowing water for their propagation. About us, neither had gained a footing. Laburnums, pink maize, snowballs, and trees of why? Arborvitae? Arborvitae. That one.
Arborvitae.
I was so wrong. Arborvitae. About us, neither had gained a footing. Laburnums, pink maize, snowballs, and trees of arborvitae rose out of laurels and hydrangeas, green and brilliant, into the sunlight. It's a type of tree. I don't know. That's it. rose out of laurels and hydrangeas, green and brilliant into the sunlight. Beyond Kensington, dense smoke was rising, and that and a blue haze hid the northward hills. The artilleryman began to tell me the sort of people who still remained in London. One night last week, he said, some fools got the electric light in order, and there was all Regent Street and the circus ablaze, crowded with painted and ragged drunkards, men and women, dancing and shouting till dawn. A man who was there told me. And as the day came, they became more aware of a fighting machine, standing near the Langham and looking down at them. Heaven knows how long he'd been there. It must have given some of them a nasty turn. He came down the road towards them, and picked up nearly 100, too drunk or frightened to run away. Grotesque gleam of a time no history will ever fully describe. From that, in answer to my questions, he came round to his grandiose plans again. He grew enthusiastic. He talked so eloquently of the possibility of capturing a fighting machine that I more than half believed in him again. But now that I was beginning to understand something of his quality, I could divine the stress he laid on doing nothing precipitately. And I noted that now there was no question that he personally was to capture and fight the great machine. After a time we went down to the cellar. Neither of us seemed disposed to resume digging, and when he suggested a meal, I was nothing loath. He became suddenly very generous, and when we had eaten he went away and returned with some excellent cigars. We lit these, and his optimism glowed. He was inclined to regard my coming as a great occasion. "There's some champagne in the cellar," he said. "We can dig better on this Thames-side Burgundy," said I. "No," said he. "I am host today. Champagne. Great God! We're a heavy enough task before us. Let us take a rest and gather strength while we may. Look at those blistered hands." And, pursuant to this idea of a holiday, he insisted upon playing cards after we had eaten. He taught me euchre, and after dividing London between us, I taking the northern side and he the southern, we played for parish points. Grotesque and foolish as this will seem to the sober reader, it is absolutely true. And, what is more remarkable, I found the card game, and several others we played, extremely interesting. Strange mind of man, that with our species upon the edge of extermination, or appalling degradation, with no clear prospect before us but the chance of a horrible death, we could sit following the chance of this painted pasteboard, and playing the joker with vivid delight. Afterwards he taught me poker, and I beat him at 3 tough chess games. When dark came, we decided to take the risk, and lit a lamp. After an interminable string of games, we supped, and the artilleryman finished the champagne. We went on smoking the cigars. He was no longer the energetic regenerator of his species I had encountered in the morning. He was still optimistic, but it was less kinetic, a more thoughtful optimism. I remember he wound up with my health, proposed in a speech of small variety and considerable intermittence. I took a cigar and went upstairs to look at the lights of which he had spoken, that blazed so greenly along the Highgate hills. At first, I stared unintelligently across the London Valley. The northern hills were shrouded in darkness. The fires near Kensington glowed redly. And now and then an orange-red tongue of flame flashed up and vanished in the deep blue night. All the rest of London was black. Then, nearer, I perceived a strange light, a pale violet-purple fluorescent glow, quivering under the night breeze. For a space I could not understand it. And then I knew that it must be the red weed from which this faint irradiation proceeded. With that realization, my dormant sense of wonder, my sense of the proportion of things, awoke again. I glanced from that to Mars, red and clear, glowing high in the west, and then gazed long and earnestly at the darkness of Hampstead and Highgate. I remained a very long time upon the roof, wondering at the grotesque changes of the day. I recalled my mental states from the midnight prayer to the foolish card-playing. I had a violent revulsion of feeling. I remember I flung away the cigar with a certain wasteful symbolism. My folly came to me with glaring exaggeration. I seemed a traitor to my wife and to my kind. I was filled with remorse. I resolved to leave this strange, undisciplined dreamer of great things to his drink and gluttony, and go into London. There, it seemed to me, I had the best chance of learning what the Martians and my fellow man were doing. I was still upon the roof when the late moon rose. End of chapter 7. Don't worry, Spyro is just beyond this wall here. Chapter 8. Dead London. And now my speech. How many pages left at this point? We're on 239. And it goes to 254. 15 pages left? Union mandated break when? I don't know. I don't take as many of those when I'm reading. Usually it'd be about right now. But I probably won't until we finish the book, I think. We're so close. We're on chapter 8. The only chapter after chapter 8 is chapter 9. And then there's the prologue. So there's not even like a chapter 10. There's just chapter 8, 9, and the prologue. Hello, Sundry Colors. You came just in time. Starting chapter 8, Dead London. I thought I read prologue. I'm sorry. It is epilogue. My bad. I'm an idiot. I deserve shame. Dead London. After I had parted from the artilleryman, I went down the hill, and by the High Street across the bridge to Fulham. I went across the bridge to Fulham. The red weed was tumultuous at this time, and nearly choked the bridge roadway. But its fronds were already whitened in patches by the spreading disease that presently removed it swiftly. At the corner of the lane that runs to Putney Bridge, I'm gonna start over. From the top, guys. I know, I hate it, Toucan. You guys have such stupid towns. After I had parted from the artilleryman, I went down the hill, and by the High Street across the bridge to Fulham. The red weed was tumultuous at that time, and nearly choked the bridge roadway. But its fronds were already whitened in patches by the spreading disease that presently removed it so swiftly. At the corner of the lane that runs to Putney Bridge station, I found a man lying. He was as black as a sweep with the black dust, alive, but helplessly and speechlessly drunk. I could get nothing from him but curses and furious language. Curses and furious lunges at my head. I think I should have stayed by him, but for the brutal expression on his face. There was black dust along the roadway from the bridge onwards, and it grew thicker in Fulham. The streets were horribly quiet. I got food, sour, hard, and moldy, but quite eatable, in a baker's shop there. Some ways towards Walham Green, the streets became clear of powder, and I passed a white terrace of houses on fire. The noise of the burning was an absolute relief. Going on towards Brompton, the streets were quiet again. Here I came upon more of the black powder in the streets, and upon dead bodies. I saw altogether about a dozen in the length of Fulham Road. They had been dead many days, so I hurried quickly past them. The black powder covered them over and softened their outlines. One or two had been disturbed by dogs. Where there was no black powder, it was curiously like a Sunday in the city, with the closed shops, the houses locked up and the blinds drawn, the desertion and the stillness. In some places plunderers had been at work. but rarely at other than the provision and wine shops. A jeweler's window had been broken open in one place, but apparently the thief had been disturbed, and a number of gold chains and a watch lay scattered on the pavement. I did not trouble to touch them. Farther on was a tattered woman in a heap on a doorstep. The hand that hung over her knee was gashed and bled down her rusty brown dress, and a smashed magnum of champagne formed a pool across the pavement. She seemed asleep, but she was dead. The farther I penetrated into London, the profounder grew the stillness. But it was not so much the stillness of death. It was the stillness of suspense, of expectation. At any time, the destruction that had already singed the northwestern borders of the metropolis and had annihilated Ealing and Kilburn might strike among these houses and leave them smoking ruins. It was a city condemned and derelict. In South Kensington, the streets were clear of dead and of black powder. It was near South Kensington that I first heard the howling. It crept, almost imperceptibly, upon my senses. It was a sobbing alternation of two notes. Oola, 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 keeping on perpetually. When I passed streets that ran northward, it grew in volume, and houses and buildings seemed to harden and cut it off again. It came in a full tide down Exhibition Road. I stopped, staring towards Kensington Gardens, wondering at this strange, remote wailing. It was as if that mighty desert of houses had found a voice for its fear and solitude. Oola, 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 wailed the superhuman note. I have no idea what this sounds like. Wailed that superhuman note. Great waves of sound sweeping down the broad sunlight. Great waves of sound sweeping down the broad sunlit roadway between the tall buildings on each side. I turned northwards, marveling, towards the iron gates of Hyde Park. I had half a mind to break into the Natural History Museum and find my way up to the summit of the towers, in order to see across the park. But I decided to keep to the ground, where quick hiding was possible, and so went up on Exhibition Road. All the large mansions on each side of the road were empty and still, and my footsteps echoed against the sides of the houses. At the top, near the park gate, I came upon a strange sight. A bus overturned, and the skeleton of a horse picked clean. I puzzled over this for a time, and then went on to the bridge over the Serpentine. The voice grew stronger and stronger. Though I could see nothing above the housetops on the north side of the park, save a haze of smoke to the northwest. Oola, 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 cried the voice, coming, as it seemed to me, from the district about Regent's Park. Hoo-ha. The desolating cry worked upon my mind. The mood that had sustained me had passed. The wailing took possession of me. I found I was intensely weary, footsore, and now and again hungry and thirsty. It was already past noon. Why was I wandering along in this city of the dead? Why was I alone when all London was lying in state and in its black shroud? I felt intolerably lonely. My mind ran on old friends in the chemist shops, of the liquors the wine merchants stored. Oh my god, I cannot fucking read. There's like one more chapter and I just can't. Hi. Hey. I keep skipping lines, like, it's terrible. Okay. His friends were not in the chemist's shop, or whatever the fuck it said. My mind ran on old friends that I had forgotten for years. I thought of the poisons in the chemist's shops, of the liquors the wine merchants stored. I recalled the two sodden creatures of despair, who, so far as I knew, shared the city with myself. I came into Oxford Street by the Marble Arch, and here and again black powder and several bodies, and an evil, ominous smell from the gratings of the cellars of some of the houses. I grew very thirsty after the heat of my long walk. With infinite trouble, I managed to break into a public house and get food and drink. I was weary after eating and went into the parlor behind the bar and slept on a black horsehair sofa I found there. I awoke to find that dismal howling still in my ears. What does this sound like then? I like that. Ooh la. That's the one you think is super scary. Okay, I will try my best. When I awoke to find that dismal howling still in my ears. Ooh la! Ooh la! Ooh la! Ooh! Ooh! Ooh la! Haunting. It was now dusk, and after I had rooted out some biscuits and cheese in the bar. Ooh, I get to do it again. Okay. Anyways, I rooted out some biscuits and a cheese in the bar. There was a meat safe, but it contained nothing but maggots. I wandered on through the silent residential squares to Baker Street. Portman Square is the only one I can name. and so came out at last upon Regent's Park. And as I emerged from the top of Baker Street, I saw far away over the trees, in the clearness of the sunset, the hood of the Martian giant from which this howling proceeded. I was not terrified. I came upon him as if it were a matter of course. I watched him for some time, but he did not move. He appeared to be standing and yelling, for no reason that I could discover. I tried to formulate a plan of action. That perpetual sound of oola, 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 oola confused my mind. Perhaps I was too tired to be very fearful. Certainly I was more curious to know the reason of this monotonous crying than afraid. I turned back away from the park and struck into Park Road, intending to skirt the park. Went along the shelter of the terraces and got a view of this stationary, howling Martian from the direction of St. John's Wood. That's not the oola, that's just the sound they make. That does not instill fear in your butthole. I don't know what will. I'm afraid of boats in the fog. Okay, a couple hundred yards out of Baker Street, I heard a yelping chorus and saw first a dog with a piece of putrescent red meat in his jaws coming headlong towards me, and then a pack of starving mongrels in pursuit of him. He made a wide curve to avoid me, as though he feared I might prove a fresh competitor. As the yelping died away down the silent road, the wailing sound of oola, 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 oola reasserted itself. Oola. I'm trying. I came upon the wrecked handling machine halfway to St. John's Wood Station. At first I thought a house had fallen across the road. It was only as I clambered among the ruins that I saw, with a start, this mechanical Samson lying, with its tentacles bent and smashed and twisted, among the ruins it had made. Ooh, long shots! That's the best one. Holy shit. I'm not even gonna read it. Okay. The smashed and twisted tentacles among the ruins it had made, the forepart was shattered. It seemed as if it had been driven blindly straight at the house and had been overwhelmed in its overthrow. It seemed to me that this might have happened by a handling machine escaping from the guidance of its Martian. could not clamber among the ruins to see it. And the twilight was now so far advanced that the blood with which the seat was smeared, and the gnawed gristle of the Martian that the dogs had left, were invisible to me. Wondering still more at all that I had seen, I pushed on towards Primrose Hill. Far away through a gap in the trees, I saw a second Martian, as motionless as the first, standing in the park towards the zoological gardens, and silent. A little beyond the ruins, about the smashed handling machine, I came upon the red weed again, and found the Regent's Canal, a spongy mass of dark red vegetation. As I crossed the bridge, the sound of had ceased. It was, as it were, cut off. The silence came like a thunderclap. The dusky houses about me stood faint and tall and dim. The trees towards the park were growing black. All about me the red weed clambered along the ruins, writhing to get above me in the dimness. Night, the mother of fear and mystery, was upon me. But while that voice sounded the solitude, the desolation, it had been endurable. By virtue of it, London had seemed alive still, and the sense of life about me had upheld me. Then suddenly a change, the passing of something, I knew not what, and then a stillness that could be felt. Nothing but this gaunt quiet. London about me gazed at me spectrally. The windows in the white houses were like the eye sockets of skulls. About me, my imagination found 1,000 noiseless enemies moving. Terror seized me, a horror of my temerity. In front of me, the road became pitchy black, as though it was tarred, and I saw a contorted shape lying across the pathway. I could not bring myself to go on. I turned down St. John's Wood Road and ran headlong from this unendurable stillness towards Kilburn. I hid from the night and the silence until long after midnight. In a cabman's shelter in Harrow Road. But before the dawn, my courage returned. And while the stars were still in the sky, I turned once more towards Regent's Park. I missed my way among the streets, and presently saw down a long avenue, in the half-light of the early dawn, the curve of Primrose Hill. On the summit, towering up to the fading stars, was a third Martian, erect and motionless like the others. An insane resolve possessed me. I would die and end it. and I would save myself even the trouble of killing myself. I marched on recklessly towards the Titan, and then as I drew nearer and the light grew, I saw that a multitude of black birds was circling and clustering around the hood. At that, my heart gave a bound, and I began running along the road. I hurried through the red weed that choked St. Edmund's Terrace. I waded breast high across a torrent of water that was rushing down from the waterworks towards the Albert Road, and emerged upon the grass before the rising of the sun. Great mounds had been heaped about the crest of the hill, making a huge redoubt of it. It was the final and largest place the Martians had made. And from behind these heaps, there rose a thin smoke against the sky. Against the skyline, an eager dog ran and disappeared. The thought that had flashed into my mind grew real, grew credible. I felt no fear, only a wild, trembling exultation as I ran up the hill towards the motionless monster. Out of the hood hung lank shreds of brown, at which the hungry birds pecked and tore. In another moment I had scrambled upon the earthen rampart, and stood upon its crest, and the interior of the redoubt was and stood upon its crest, and the interior of the redoubt was below me. A mighty space it was, with gigantic machines here and there within it, huge mounds of material, and strange shelter places. And scattered about it, some in their overturned war machines, some in the now rigid handling machines, and a dozen of them, stark and silent and laid in a row, were the Martians, dead, slain by the putrefacive and diseased bacteria, slain by the putrefacive and disease bacteria against which their systems were unprepared. Slain as the red weed was slain. Slain after all men's devices had failed, by the humblest things that God, in his wisdom, has put upon the earth. For so it had come about, as indeed I and many men might have foreseen, had not terror and disaster blinded our minds. These germs of disease have taken toll of humanity since the beginning of things, taken toll of our pre-human ancestors since life began here. But by virtue of this natural selection of our kind, we have developed resisting powers. To no germs do we succumb without struggle, and to many, those that cause putrefaction in dead matter, for instance, our living frames are altogether immune. But there are no bacteria on Mars, and directly these invaders arrived, directly they drank and fed. Our microscopic allies began to work their overthrow. Already, when I watched them, they were irrevocably doomed, dying and rotting even as they went to and fro. It was inevitable. By the toll of 1 billion deaths, man has bought his birthright of the earth. and it is his against all comers. It would still be his, were the Martian 10 times as mighty as they were. For neither do men live nor die in vain. Here and there they were scattered, nearly 50 altogether, in that great gulf that they had made, overtaken by a death that must have seemed to them as incomprehensible as any death could be. To me also at that time, this death was incomprehensible. All I knew was that these things that had been alive and so terrible to men were dead. For a moment I believed that the destruction of Sennacherib had been repeated, that God had repented, that the angel of death had slain them in the night.
Saturday until Wednesday.
I stood staring into the pit, and my heart lightened gloriously. Even as the rising sun struck the world to fire about me with his rays. The pit was still in darkness. The pit was still in darkness. The mighty engines, so great and wonderful in their power and complexity, so unearthly in their tortuous forms, rose weird and vague and strange out of the shadows towards the light. A multitude of dogs, I could hear, fought over the bodies that lay darkly in the pit, in the depth of the pit, far below me. Across the pit on its farther lip, flat and vast and strange, lay the great flying machine with which they had been experimenting upon our denser atmosphere when decay and death arrested them. Death had come not a day too soon. At the sound of a cawing overhead, I looked up at the huge fighting machine that would fight no more forever, at the tattered red shreds of flesh that dripped down upon the overturned seats on the summit of Primrose Hill. I turned and looked down the slope of the hill to where, enhaloed now in birds, stood those other 2 Martians that I had seen overnight, just as death had overtaken them. The one had died, even as it had been crying to its companions. Perhaps it was the last to die, and its voice had gone on perpetually until the force of its machinery was exhausted. They glittered now, harmless tripod towers of shining metal, in the brightness of the rising sun. All about the pit, and saved as by a miracle from everlasting destruction, stretched the great mother of cities. Those who have only seen London, veiled in her somber robes of smoke, can scarcely imagine the naked clearness and beauty of the silent wilderness of houses. Eastward, over the blackened ruins of the Albert Terrace and the splintered spire of the church, the sun blazed dazzlingly in a clear sky, and here and there some facet in the great wilderness of roofs caught the light and glared with a white intensity. Northward were Kilburn and Hampstead, blue and crowded with houses. Good night. Westward, the great city was dimmed, and southward, beyond the Martians, the green waves of Regent's Park, the Langham Hotel, the dome of the Albert Hall, the Imperial Institute, and the giant mansions of the Brompton Road came out clear and little in the sunrise. The jagged ruins of Westminster rising hazily beyond. Far away in blue were the Surrey hills, and the towers of the crystal palace, glittering like two silver rods. The dome of St. Paul's was dark against the sunrise, and injured, I saw for the first time, by a huge gaping cavity in its western side. And as I looked at this wide expanse of houses and factories and churches, silent and abandoned, as I thought of the multitudinous hopes and efforts, the innumerable hosts of lives that had gone to build this human reef, and of the swift and ruthless destruction that had hung over it all, and I realized that the shadow had been rolled back, and that men might still live in the streets, and this dear, vast, dead city of mine be once more alive and powerful. I felt a wave of emotion that was near akin to tears. The torment was over. Even that day the healing would begin. The survivors of the people scattered over the country, leaderless, lawless, foodless, like sheep without a shepherd, the thousands who had fled by sea, would begin to return. The pulse of life, growing stronger and stronger, would beat again in the empty streets and pour across the vacant squares. Whatever destruction was done, the hand of the destroyer was stayed. All the gaunt wrecks, the blackened skeletons of the houses that stared so dismally at the sunlit grass on the hill, would presently be echoing with the hammers of the restorers and ringing with the tapping of their trowels. At the thought, I extended my hands towards the sky and began thanking God. In a year, thought I. In a year. With overwhelming force came the thought of myself, of my wife, and the old life of hope and tender helpfulness that had ceased forever. End of chapter 8. Thanks for the follows, everybody. True. Thank you. Thank you. Hold on. 2 more chapters now. Four pages left. Chapter 9, Wreckage. And now comes the strangest thing in my story. Yet perhaps it is not altogether strange. I remember, clearly and coldly and vividly, all that I did that day until the time I stood weeping and praising God upon the summit of Primrose Hill. And then I forget. Of the next 3 days I know nothing. I have learned since that, so far from my being the first discoverer of the Martian overthrow, several such wanderers as myself had already discovered this on the previous night. One man, the first, had gone to St. Martin's-le-Grand, and while I sheltered in the cabman's hut, had contrived to telegraph to Paris. Thence the joyful news had flashed all over the world. 1,000 cities, chilled by ghastly apprehensions, suddenly flashed into frantic illuminations. They knew of it in Dublin, Edinburgh, Manchester, Birmingham, at the time when I stood upon the verge of the pit. Already men, weeping with joy as I have heard, shouting and staying their work to shake hands and shout, were making up trains, even as near as Crewe, to descend upon London. The church bells that had ceased a fortnight since suddenly caught the news, until all of England was bell-ringing. Men on cycles, lean-faced, unkempt, scorched, along every country lane, shouting of unhoped deliverance, shouting to gaunt, staring figures of despair. And for the food, across the Channel, across the Irish Sea, across the Atlantic, corn, bread, and meat were tearing to our relief. All the shipping in the world seemed going Londonward in those days. But of all this I have no memory. I drifted, a demented man. I found myself in a house of kindly people, who had found me on the third day wandering, weeping, and raving through the streets of St. John's Wood. They have since told me that I was singing some insane doggerel about the last man left alive, hurrah, the last man left alive. Troubled as they were with their own affairs, these people, whose name, much as I would like to express my gratitude to them, and may not even give here, nevertheless cumbered themselves with me, sheltered me, and protected me from myself. Apparently they had learned something of my story from me during the days of my lapse. Very gently, when my mind was assured again, did they break to me that they had learned of the fate of Leatherhead. 2 days after I was imprisoned, it had been destroyed, with every soul in it, by a Martian. He had swept it out of existence, as it seemed, without any provocation, as a boy might crush an anthill. In the mere wantonness of power. I was a lonely man, and they were very kind to me. I was a lonely man, and a sad one, and they bore with me. I remained with them 4 days after my recovery. All that time I felt a growing craving to look once more on whatever remained of the little life that seemed so happy and bright in my past. It was a mere hopeless desire to feast upon my misery. They dissuaded me. They did all they could to divert me from this morbidity. But at last I could resist the impulse no longer. And I, promising faithfully to return to them, and parting, as I will confess, from these 4-day friends with tears, I went out again into the streets that had lately been so dark and strange and empty. Already they were busy with returning people. In places even there were shops open, and I saw a drinking fountain running water. I remember how mockingly bright the day seemed, as I went back on my melancholy pilgrimage to the little house at Woking. How busy the streets, and vivid the moving life about me. So many people were abroad everywhere, busied in 1,000 activities, that it seemed incredible that any great proportion of the population could have been slain. But then I noticed how yellow were the skins of the people I met, how shaggy the hair of the men, how large and bright their eyes, and that every other man still wore his dirty rags. Their faces seemed all with one of two expressions, a leaping exultation and energy, or a grim resolution. Save for the expression of the faces, London seemed a city of tramps. The vestries were indiscriminately distributing bread sent by the French government. The ribs of the few horses showed dismally. Haggard special constables with white badges stood at the corners of every street. I saw little of the mischief wrought by the Martians until I reached Wellington Street. And there I saw the red weed, clambering over the buttresses of Waterloo Bridge. At the corner of the bridge, too, I saw one of the common contrasts of that grotesque time. A sheet of paper flaunting against a thicket of the red weed, transfixed by a stick that kept it in place. It was the placard of the first newspaper to resume publication, the Daily Mail. I bought a copy for a blackened shilling I found in my pocket. Most of it was in blank, but the solitary compositor who did the thing had amused himself by making a grotesque scheme of advertisement stereo on the back page. The matter he printed was emotional. The news organization had not as yet found its way back. I learned nothing fresh, except that, already in 1 week, the examination of the Martian mechanisms had yielded astonishing results. Among other things, the article assured me, what I did not believe at the time, that the secret of flying was discovered. At Waterloo, I guess they couldn't fly when this was written, right? Okay. At Waterloo, I found the free trains that were taking people to their homes. The first rush was already over. There were few people in the train, and I was in no mood for casual conversation. I got a compartment to myself and sat with folded arms, looking grayly at the sunlit devastation that flowed past the windows. And just outside the terminus, the train jolted over temporary rails, and on either side of the railway the houses were blackened ruins. To Clapham Junction, the face of London was grimy with powder of the black smoke, in spite of the 2 days of thunderstorms and rain. And at Clapham Junction, the line had been wrecked again. There were hundreds of out-of-work clerks and shopmen working side by side with the customary navvies, and we were jolted over a hasty relaying. Hi, Bjorker. All down the line from there, the aspect of the country was gaunt and unfamiliar. Yeah, navvies, I don't know how to say it, so I'm just going to say it. Wimbledon particularly had suffered. Walton, by virtue of its unburned pine woods, seemed the least hurt of any place along the line. The Wandle, the Mole, every little stream was a heaped mass of red wheat, an appearance between butcher's meat and pickled cabbage. The Surrey pine woods were too dry, however, for the festoons of the red climber. Beyond Wimbledon, within sight of the line, in certain nursery grounds, were the heaped masses of earth about the 6th cylinder. A number of people were standing about it, and some sappers were busy in the midst of it. Over it flaunted a Union Jack, flapping cheerfully in the morning breeze. The nursery grounds were everywhere crimson with the weed, a wide expanse of livid color cut with purple shadows, and very painful to the eye. One's gaze went with infinite relief from the scorched grays and sullen reds of the foreground to the blue-green softness of the eastward hills. The line on the London side of Woking Station was still undergoing repair, so I descended at Bayfleet Station and took the road to Maybury, past the place where I and the artilleryman had talked to the hussars, and on by the spot where the Martian had appeared to me in the thunderstorm. Here, moved by curiosity, I turned aside to find, among a tangle of fronds, the warped and broken dog-cart with the whitened bones of the horse scattered and gnawed. For a time I stood regarding these vestiges. Then I returned through the pine wood, neck high with red weed here and there, to find the landlord of the spotted dog. Then I returned through the pine wood, neck high with red weed here and there, to find the landlord of the spotted dog had already found burial, and so came home past the College Arms. A man, standing at an open cottage door, greeted me by name as I passed. I looked at my house with a quick flash of hope that faded immediately. The door had been forced. It was unfastened, and was opening slowly as I approached. It slammed again. The curtains of my study fluttered out of the open window, from which I and the artilleryman had watched the dawn. No one had closed it since. The smashed bushes were just as I had left them nearly 4 weeks ago. I stumbled into the hall, and the house felt empty. The stair carpet was ruffled and discolored from where I had crouched, soaked to the skin from the thunderstorm the night of the catastrophe. Our muddy footsteps, I saw, still went up the stairs. I followed them to my study, and found lying on my writing table, still, with the selenite paperweight upon it, the sheet of work I had left on the afternoon of the opening of the cylinder. For a space I stood reading over my abandoned arguments. It was a paper on the probable development of moral ideas with the development of the civilizing process. And the last sentence was the opening of a prophecy. I thought I heard my cat puking on my bed, but I think she was just licking herself. Thank you, Mind Mestar, for subscribing. No, she did not. Okay. And the last sentence was the opening of a prophecy. In about 200 years, I had written, we may expect... The sentence ended abruptly. I remembered my inability to fix my mind that morning. Scarcely a month had gone by, and how I had broken off to get my daily chronicle from the newsboy. I remembered how I went down to the garden gate as he came along, and how I had listened to his odd story of men from Mars. I came down and went into the dining room. There were the mutton and the bread, both far gone now in decay, and a beer bottle overturned, just as I and the artilleryman had left them. My home was desolate. I perceived the folly of the faint hope I had cherished so long. And then a strange thing occurred. It is no use, said a voice. The house is deserted. No one has been here these 10 days. Do not stay here to torment yourself. No one escaped but you. I was startled. Had I spoken my thought aloud? I turned, and the French window was open behind me. I made a step to it and looked out. And there, amazed and afraid, even as I stood amazed and afraid, were my cousin and my wife. My wife, white and tearless. She gave a faint cry. I came, she said. I knew. She put her hand to her throat, swayed. I made a step forward and caught her in my arms. End of chapter 9. Epilogue time. I have to go to the bathroom though. Look at that. Where did we start? We read this much. That's pretty crazy, guys. No, we've been reading it for a few weeks. Oh my god. Moose, thank you. Oh, we still have to do the epilogue, but the end. You're the smeechiest. We're never gonna forget the smeech. The great smeech. Thank you so much, Moose. Also, happy vacation. Brilliant, brilliant smeech. Now for our next smeecher. Aw, thank you, Gravega. You say what you mean, so. No matter how deeply I am sleeping, nothing can jog me into instant alertness as the sound of a cat about to puke. Preparing to puke. I thought I heard it. And I was like, please, no, I already took the sheets off. Because they puked on my sheets like a week ago. It's just a bare mattress up there. I honestly shouldn't even allow them in my room until it gets covered. What book is next? I was thinking of doing The Stranger by Camus. Because it's short and sweet and leaves quite an impression. Alright, fine. I'm literally going to start a channel just to do Edgar Allan Poe myself. Jeez, okay. Have fun. I hope it's successful and goes well. Okay, I'll be right back. Oh no. Hi. Magnetar! We haven't read it yet! Stop spoiling the story! Jesus fucking Christ. Leave something for the page turning. God. God! You just ruined it! What the fuck? Why? Why would you just type the whole, like, the generic structure of the plot? Just post it in chat, guys. Go ahead. There's more to it than that anyways. But Jesus Christ. What if some of these people don't even know what the book is? They don't know there's a murder. They don't know. They don't know. They don't know anything. They didn't need to know anything about the story, and you told them everything. Wow. I cannot wait to smoke a cigarette. It has been 2 hours and 40 minutes. Thank you, chat. I shall now read the epilogue of The War of the Worlds. Okay. I cannot but regret, now that I am concluding my story, how little I am able to contribute to the discussions of the many debatable questions which are still unsettled. In one respect, I shall certainly provoke criticism. My particular province is speculative philosophy. My knowledge of comparative physiology is confined to a book or two. But it seems to me that the carver's suggestion as to the reason of the rapid death of the Martians is so probable as to be regarded almost as a proven conclusion. I have assumed that in the body of my narrative. At any rate, in all the bodies of the Martians that were examined after the war, no bacteria. Okay. It's me. I'm running on my way. He's so cute. Okay. No bacteria, except those already known as terrestrial species, were found. That they did not bury any of their dead, and the reckless slaughter they perpetuated, point also to an entire ignorance about the putreficative, I think that's more accurate, okay, the putreficative process. A total ignorance of the putreficative process. But probable as this seems, it is by no means a proven conclusion. Neither is the composition of the black smoke known, which the Martians used with such deadly effect. And the generator of the heat rays remains a puzzle. The terrible disasters at the Ealing and South Kensington laboratories have disinclined analysts for further investigations upon the latter. Spectrum analysis of the black powder points unmistakably to the presence of an unknown element with a brilliant group of 3 lines in the green, and it is possible that it combines with argon to form a compound which acts at once, with deadly effect, upon some constituent in the blood. But such unproven speculations will scarcely be of interest to the general reader, to whom this story is addressed. None of the brown scum that drifted down the Thames after the destruction of Shepperton was examined at the time, and now none is forthcoming. The results of an anatomical examination of the Martians, so far as the prowling dogs have left such an examination possible, I have already given. But everyone is familiar with the magnificent and almost complete specimen in spirits at the Natural History Museum, and the countless drawings that have been made from it. And beyond that, the interest of their physiology and structure is purely scientific. A question of graver and universal interest is the possibility of another attack from the Martians. I do not think that nearly enough attention is being given to this aspect of the matter. At present, the planet Mars is in conjunction, but with every return to opposition, I, for one, anticipate a renewal of their adventure. In any case, we should be prepared. It seems to me that it should be possible to define the position of the gun from which the shots were discharged, to keep a sustained watch upon this part of the planet, and to anticipate the arrival of the next attack. In that case, the cylinder might be destroyed with dynamite or artillery before it was sufficiently cool for the Martians to emerge. Or they might be butchered by means of guns so soon as the screw opened. It seems to me that they have lost a vast advantage in this failure of their first surprise. Possibly they see it in the same light. Lessing has advanced excellent reasons for supposing that the Martians have actually succeeded in effecting a landing on the planet Venus. 7 months ago now, Venus and Mars were in alignment with the Sun. That is to say, Mars was in opposition from the point of view of an observer on Venus. Subsequently, a peculiar luminous and sinuous marking appeared on the unillumined half of the inner planet. And almost simultaneously, a faint dark mark of a similar sinuous character was detected upon a photograph of the Martian disk. One needs to see the drawings of these appearances in order to appreciate fully their remarkable resemblance in character. At any rate, whether we expect another invasion or not, our views of the human future must be greatly modified by these events. We have learned now that we cannot regard this planet as being fenced in and a secure abiding place for man. We can never anticipate the unseen good or evil that may come upon us suddenly out of space. It may be that in the larger design of the universe, this invasion from Mars is not without its ultimate benefit for men. It has robbed us of that serene confidence in the future, which is the most fruitful source of decadence. The gifts to human science it has brought are enormous, and has done much to promote the conception of the commonweal of mankind. It may be that across the immensity of space, these Martians have watched the fate of these pioneers of theirs, and learned their lesson. And that on the planet Venus they may have found a secure settlement. Be that as it may, for many years yet there will still be certainly no relaxation of the eager scrutiny of the Martian disk. And those fiery darts of the sky, the shooting stars, will bring with them as they fall an unavoidable apprehension to all the sons of men. The broadening of men's views that has resulted can scarcely be exaggerated. Before the cylinder fell, there was a general persuasion that through all the deep of space, no life existed beyond the petty surface of our minute sphere. Now we see further. If the Martians can reach Venus, there is no reason to suppose that the thing is impossible for men. And when the slow cooling of the sun makes this earth uninhabitable, as at last it must do, it may be that the thread of life that began here will have streamed out and caught our sister planet within its toils. Dim and wonderful is the vision I have conjured up in my mind of life, spreading slowly from this little seed bed of the solar system, throughout the inanimate vastness of sidereal space. But that is a remote dream. It may be, on the other hand, that the destruction of the Martians is only a reprieve to them and not to us. Perhaps is the future ordained. I must confess, the stress and danger of the time have left an abiding sense of doubt and insecurity upon my mind. I sit in my study, writing by lamplight, and suddenly I see again the healing valley below set with writhing flames, and feel the house behind me and about me, empty and desolate. I go out into the Byfleet Road, and vehicles pass me. A butcher boy in a cart, a cab full of visitors, a workman on a bicycle, children going to school. And suddenly they become vague and unreal. And as I hurry again, with the artilleryman, through the hot, brooding silence of a night, I see the black powder darkening the silent streets, and the contorted bodies shrouded in that layer. They rise upon me, tattered and dog-bitten. They gibber and grow fiercer, paler, uglier, mad distortions of humanity at last. And I wake, cold and wretched, in the darkness of the night. I go to London, and I see the busy multitudes in Fleet Street and the Strand, and it comes across my mind that they are but the ghosts of the past, haunting the streets that I have seen, silent and wretched, going to and fro, phantasms in a dead city, the mockery of life in a galvanized body. And strange, too, is it to stand on Primrose Hill, as I did but a day before writing this last chapter, to see the great province of houses dim and blue through the haze of the smoke and mist, vanishing at last into the vague lower sky, to see the people walking to and fro among the flower beds on the hill, to see the sightseers about the Martian machine that stands there still, to hear the tumult of playing children, and to recall the time when I saw it all, bright and clear-cut, hard and silent, under the dawn of that last great day. And strangest of all is it to hold my wife's hand again, and to think that I have counted her, and that she has counted me among the dead. The end.